I hope that this new revelation of chemical weapons will move the president to do what he should have done 2 years ago. From the statement that's coming out of the White House, I'm not sure they will.
Senator John McCain, who's been pushing President Obama to intervene in Syria for 2 years, renewing his call this week after findings the Assad regime has used chemical weapons. And it's time now for our Sunday group. Brit Hume, Fox News senior political analyst. Amy Walter of the Cook Political Report. Bill Kristol from the Weekly Standard. And Charles Lane of the Washington Post. Well, I think it's fair to say that President Obama has put himself in a bit of a box here on Syria. He kept talking for months about red lines, enormous consequences, game changers, but he's clearly mindful of the bad intelligence that led into the invasion of Iraq. And it's also clear, Britt, he has never wanted to get involved militarily in Syria. Is there a graceful way out for him now?
Well, I think what he'll do and what he's trying to do now is to insist on ironclad proof. You wonder if he doesn't want an affidavit signed by Bashar Assad himself saying, yes, indeed, we did use sarin gas on those people. Short of that, I'm not sure he's going to do anything. And look, you can understand, it's not an appetizing prospect to figure out what to do about that situation. It's so well advanced now, it might have been different if we'd moved in there earlier. But a president who didn't want to intervene to stop the deaths of what is now 70,000 people, I don't think is going to go on at least arguably incomplete evidence that there's been these chemical weapons used. So my sense is he didn't want to do anything, and for now at least he isn't going to do anything.
And do you think that there's a downside in terms of his credibility in the Middle East?
Yeah, it's not the kind of thing that I think is going to bother people going about their daily lives in America. But around the world, this kind of apparent indecisiveness and weakness has a price. It emboldens enemies, discourages allies, and it is a problem. And I think it's regrettable.
Amy, there are also serious political factors here. If you believe the polls, the American people do not want to get involved in another land war or any kind of military involvement in another Mideast country. On the other hand, as I was discussing with Brit, if you say there's a red line and somebody crosses it, is there a price to not doing anything?
Right, and I think that Brit is exactly right. It's the question of where's the cost. Politically, he's in a very different position, certainly, than where Democrats were before Iraq, for example, right? He has the public behind him, and it's not just the concern about Syria, but the cloud of Iraq and Afghanistan still lingering there. The approval rating about whether the war in Afghanistan was even worth fighting is now 39%. So there is definitely a very strong distaste on the part of Americans to do anything there. The other piece of this, too, is you have a public, again, unlike 2003, I say this because we are spending so much time talking about the George W. Bush administration after the opening. Sorry, I was thinking about the library. But the fact is, the economy itself, the fact that, we are talking much more now about Syria, we're talking about guns, we're talking about some of these other issues. We haven't talked about the fact that the GDP has also been hit, and the fact that we still are looking for economic growth that's not there yet. So I think for this president, he's in a position right now where the American public wants to see more than anything a discussion about the thing that they thought that the election was about in 2012, that they thought the election was about in 2010 and 2008, which was the economy. This is obviously not getting him into that position.
Yes, but Mr. Kristol is, I know, going to say, but you got to do two things at the same time. Let's talk specifically about Iran, which I think everybody agrees in the Middle East is the real key factor here. As I discussed with the ambassador, discerning as an intelligence matter, assessing whether or not Syria has used chemical weapons is a much easier technical matter than assessing whether or not Iran has a nuclear capability, which is all behind closed doors, much harder, and certainly in terms of this kind of airtight case and proof, much harder to assess. If he fails to act now, what do you think is the message to the mullahs in Tehran?
Well, I think the message is that he, as Amy and Brit said, this is not a president who wants to start another war. That's the way he sees it. I think it's totally irresponsible for an American president to have that. No one wants to start wars, but you've got to do what you've got to do. And it doesn't really matter if the public is at 39% or 60%. I mean, really, this is what's happening in Syria is a very serious matter. I mean, the spillover effects, leaving aside 75,000 people killed, which incidentally at one point in time liberals and Democrats cared about. You know, there once was a liberal internationalist wing of the Democratic Party. Chuck Lane is the last representative, but probably, I mean, that actually thought maybe U.S. should use its power to prevent this kind of slaughter from happening. But the actual effects in Jordan and in Iraq, where we've spent a lot of treasure to achieve a reasonable outcome. The president then didn't secure any troops there now, and now there's a huge danger of this spilling over into Iraq and throughout the Middle East. And then the effect in Iran, I think, is very serious. I think it emboldens the mullahs, and I think it was very significant this week that Amos Yadlin, the former head of military intelligence in Israel, who was close to Netanyahu, said we only have a few months now to deal with Iran. I think Israel now probably feels they are going to have to deal with Iran on their own and can't wait for the president.